Good afternoon. Welcome to our fifth Open Nurses conversation with a nurse luminary or ally in the field of psychedelic assisted therapies, medicine, and research. My name is Liz Willis, and I'm a nurse speaking to you from beautiful San Francisco, California, Ohlone territory. And it's my great pleasure today, and in fact, I'm quite humbled today, to speak with somebody that I admire and respect profoundly and deeply after working with her for many, many years. Sara Gael is our guest today, and she's our first therapist in this series of conversations and interviews. So welcome, Sara. And before I introduce you more directly, I'd like to take this time to welcome all of our guests and viewers today and in the future. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in our chat. Let us know who you are, what role you have in this field, or that you dare to dream to create in this field. Let us know where you're watching us from. And I'd ask today that always be mindful and respectful to your colleagues, and please hold your questions for later. Think of them and your comments, but we're going to transition following our conversation with Sara with some questions that I already have for her to welcoming all of the audience questions towards the latter portion of our hour-long interview today. So I want to just tell you a story, a brief one, as in many great stories of how my story of my relationship with Sara began. And this was, of course, at Burning Man on the playa. And it was in 2013, and it was my very first time volunteering for the Zendo. And I was just so excited to be there. And I watched her as one of the leaders, one of the supervisors. And I learned so much from her that you could never really learn in nursing, or that you aren't allowed to do in the limited time or, availability. For example, I'm an ER nurse, so I don't have the time to sit with a guest and to hold space and to do it compassionately and wisely and safely and allow for an unfolding. And I watched Sara do this, but also train countless volunteers over many years in local, national, and international settings in harm reduction and peer support. I've witnessed her grow as a leader in the fields of decriminalization, harm reduction, peer support, and psychedelic assisted therapies and research. And again, I'm so grateful to you for being here today, Sara. I'd like to read your bio to introduce you and then begin our conversation. After receiving her master's degree in Transpersonal Counseling Psychology at Naropa University, Sara began working with MAPS in 2012, coordinating psychedelic harm reduction services at festivals and events worldwide with the Zendo Project. Sara was an intern therapist for the recently completed MAPS Phase 2 clinical trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD in Boulder, Colorado. She maintains a private practice as a psychotherapist specializing in trauma and non-ordinary states of consciousness. Sara believes that developing a comprehensive understanding of psychedelic medicines through research and education is essential for the health and well-being of individuals, communities, and the planet. And Sara, I'd like to welcome you on to our event. Hello.
Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Sara, where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado.
Excellent. Great. Well, is there anything you'd like to say or invite in before we begin our conversation together?
Yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. It's a really unique opportunity, and just really appreciate what Open Nurses is doing. And thank you so much for this invitation to be here.
Yeah. Thank you and welcome. Well, tell us, Sara, a little bit about the trajectory of your career leading up to today. I've told you what I've witnessed, but I really don't know your story and where you came from and how it all began.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it all began. Yeah, it's such a multifaceted question because it's definitely so intertwined and interwoven with my own healing and my own trajectory of my own personal healing path, which I think, began when I came onto this planet, and perhaps before, who knows? So yeah, from a very early age, I was really drawn to guess, more mystical and spiritual elements of reality, including nature and meditation and things like Taoism and Buddhism. And I can remember just from a very early age being really drawn to things that were related to non-ordinary states of consciousness or altered states of consciousness, things like yoga. And I was very just curious in that regard. And so I think that my interest in psychedelics probably initially came from more of the mystical or spiritual side of things. And growing up, I grew up in Taos, New Mexico, and it was a place where there was definitely a lot of substance use happening around when I was growing up, and psychedelics happened to be one of those substances that was around. And for the people who are from small towns, maybe some people can relate to just exploring from a very early age. And so I kind of later on transitioned, went into my career. Actually, my career started in environmental science and environmental policy. And I was actually really informed from my earlier experiences in accessing altered states from a variety of ways. I was really aware, I think, from a very early age of the state of the planet and specifically the state of the environment. And I went into study environmental science. And then as I was doing that, I really recognized, I got very jaded, very concerned with what was happening in the world, on the planet. And I came to decide that for myself, my path was through helping individuals reconnect with themselves. And because I started to recognize that a lot of the problems, the environmental problems, were, in my view, really a result of a level of disconnection and a level of perpetuation of trauma in a way. So when we talk about trauma and trauma perpetuation and the cycle of trauma, we tend to think of it more in relation to individuals, like passed down from individual to individual. And I see, especially as a transpersonal therapist, that trauma also gets transferred onto the planet, onto other beings as well. And also we're in a state of often disconnection from nature. And when we're in that state of disconnection from nature, we tend not to think about treating our environment in the way that we should be, which is as an extension and really a part of ourselves and the whole reason we're even able to be here. So from that place, I got really curious around humans and how we work and why we were doing some of the things that we were doing to the environment and to each other. So I decided to shift my career from environmental science into therapy, and I started studying Transpersonal Counseling Psychology at Naropa University. And from there, it's a private university in Boulder, and it is really based in a lot of Buddhist philosophy. And I really learned more about psychedelics when I was in school. I started learning about the actual research that had happened. So whereas when I was younger, learning about psychedelics was much more, the story that used to be and still is in many places and for many people, the stigma that psychedelics are just bad and all drugs are bad and there's no potential use for them. And if you use drugs, you're a bad person. And there's this narrative in our society. And so I went from kind of a more of an anecdotal, like my story around psychedelics as these very, these things that were really exciting, but also had all this baggage, this cultural baggage. And I started to learn, these psychedelics were actually used in therapy in the 60s and since then, and obviously have been used for thousands and thousands of years by indigenous peoples all over the world for the benefit and purposes of personal and collective healing. And so as I started to learn more about psychedelics and the history and the current research that was happening, and specifically started learning about the research that was happening at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, I got really interested and met a mentor in this work, Marcela O'Talara, who is the principal investigator for the Boulder MDMA PTSD study, and began working with her on the first phase 2 of the study in Boulder. And so I started working on that phase in 2015, and now we're working in phase 3, and which results have been coming out. A New York Times article came out recently, and we published a paper on the phase 3 results in Nature. And so, yeah, really exciting. And as I started doing the research, I also was invited to Burning Man. And that's where actually Marcella invited me. She was going to meet with Rick Doblin, who is her longtime friend. And she said, "Do you want to come do this thing in the desert?" And I had known about Burning Man, but never could go because I always had school. And so she said, "Do you want to come do psychedelic harm reduction and peer support?" And I was like, "I have no idea what that is, but let's do it." And so I went, and MAPS had been providing peer support since really the early 2000s, had been working with a variety of events and festivals offering psychedelic peer support for people who are having challenging psychedelic experiences, or just anyone who wants to process their experience, as well as people who are just having challenging emotional experiences, not actively on a psychedelic. And at that time, I had just graduated and received my master's degree, and I just loved the peer support environment, and I can share a little bit more about peer support today, but just really fell in love with that environment as well. And so started doing that concurrently, and served as the director of the harm reduction department, which is the department within MAPS that launched the Zendo Project, and directed that project from 2016 to last year to 2020. And so, yeah, currently still work at MAPS. I transitioned so that I can continue to explore all the other opportunities, and still working within the harm reduction department as a harm reduction officer, and still doing training and education work there. So that's a bit about a long bit about how I got here doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's such an incredible story. I never knew about your environmental science background. And that really does highlight the connectivity that we all have together at all of these events, and kind of moving forward into this future realm. So yeah, and hopefully we can all heal that trauma and all of the different layers. I think one thing, did you mention your private practice? Have you had a private practice in the past as well? And do you now, or have you? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah, so I do have a private practice, and I currently have just a very small practice, and work with trauma, and also helping people integrate psychedelic experiences, as well as just, the usual depression, anxiety.
Yeah, so amazing. Yeah, thank you. Well, you've already mentioned a little bit about the next question that I had for you, but I just want to rephrase it in case there's anything else you'd like to add. And that was, how were you able to bridge your role as a therapist to being with these psychedelic medicines? And you have mentioned the research component and the harm reduction for people who might be partaking of these substances, or an integration phase afterward. And I'm just wondering if there's anything you could add either to the trauma component, any modalities, or any other interventions that you offer about bridging those two things, the psychedelics and the therapy.
Yeah. So, I think that my experience was really unique in that my clinical experience immediately was psychedelic informed. So as soon as I graduated, I then started working on the MDMA research. And so I don't know, if I were to ever, want a career in something else, I don't know. My whole career has been in psychedelics. And so I think that was helpful in that I kind of didn't have to retrain myself, maybe, with some kind of like older pattern around my practice, I was already really open to working with those medicines. And so I think that, I just went right into that. And I think that's going to be more and more common because as psychedelics now are becoming more mainstream, and there's going to be more opportunities for people to get involved in research and clinical work and therapy. I mean, we're seeing now that people are now having the opportunity to just go through a degree program, get a degree, and, write their dissertations on psychedelic research. And so I think a lot more people now are able to do that, whereas that wasn't really the case 10 years ago. There wasn't really many opportunities to begin working in the field of psychedelics. And so I think I graduated and came in at a time where that was just becoming an opportunity. And some of the cross-training and the other modalities that I have training in that I think have been really helpful for MDMA work specifically, as well as the work that I've done with ketamine in clinical ketamine work. Internal family systems, IFS, parts work, that has been really helpful. I have a background in somatic trauma therapy. And so I think that that's been definitely very supportive. And a lot of people's experience on psychedelics is very somatic, very nonverbal experience where they're more processing things through and in their body. So the trauma background has been really helpful. Because I think that even if it's not a trauma study or you're not specifically working on trauma, I think at the root of a lot of mental health issues is trauma, is often unresolved trauma. And so those are a couple modalities that I've found to be really helpful. And then the program that I did, because it was Transpersonal Counseling Psychology, was really helpful too, because it already wove in elements of altered state experiences, and that was really part of it. So even though the program at the time didn't talk about psychedelics, which is interesting because transpersonal psychology really did bloom out of the psychedelic 60s, and Stan Groff was one of the individuals who was instrumental in integrating the transpersonal and the holotropic into therapy. And so, I think that those different modalities and foundations really definitely really inform the work that I do with my clients and participants in the study.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great answer. I just want to note that many of our viewers, people involved in our organization, are looking to work in this field. And I'll use myself as an example and speak for myself. Wow, if these opportunities would have existed, I would have seized them. And even coming to pursue my master's degree in the past few years at UCSF, I have these big dreams and visions of, becoming trained in these types of modalities or taking it to the next step. And I found it, I was a little bit disheartened when I discovered there would really be no clinical opportunities for me at this point in time in this field. And I agree with you, it's burgeoning and it's starting. And so it's really encouraging to hear that you were able to pursue this path immediately and incorporate the degree program that you chose, and it's all informed this and brought you to where you are today. So I just want to put that out there for all of our viewers, new nurses, therapists, and other professionals and people interested in being providers. This really is happening, and we are starting to hope to develop these new opportunities. So here is a role model and example for you. Great, thank you. So our next topic is actually a chance for you to share what you value about harm reduction and peer support.
Yeah. So I feel very, very honored to have been a part of both the clinical work as well as peer support. And it's been really fascinating to do both simultaneously and to be working in a more clinical setting, really doing therapy with the medicine in an FDA approved study. And then also to be offering harm reduction or peer support at these festivals where, people are often exploring with psychedelics. And, the vast, vast majority of people who take psychedelics do so outside of a clinical context, a therapeutic context, or a ceremonial context, like in the case of ayahuasca. And so I think that, we don't obviously know the exact percentage, but I think the majority of people are taking these substances in what we might call, recreational environments. And I use that word very broadly and to encompass, at home, with friends, at parties and festivals, at music concerts, at shows. A lot of people have their first psychedelic experiences at concerts, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people who come to this work, their first psychedelic experiences weren't in a clinical therapeutic context. And so I think that, and as these substances become more accepted and more mainstream, and there's more awareness around them, I think that, more and more people are exploring. And so for me, part of the excitement around peer support and harm reduction is just the amount of people that we get to support, right? Like the Zendo Project has helped. We've seen over 6,000 people come through the space.
Wow.
Like, that's so many people, compared to like our phase 3 trial, we just had 90 participants. And so it's like, there's something about the numbers that's really exciting, that like these people are coming in, and of course they're already like in the middle of their experience. It is a more of a often like a more of like a emotional kind of crisis experience, and it's not the variables aren't nearly as really as controlled as in a research setting. And so, but to be able to help that many people who may not have otherwise had a place to go, and they may have ended up in more extreme situations, are either arrested or, unnecessarily hospitalized. Obviously, some hospitalizations are necessary. But in terms of, the percentage of people that we've been able to help to de-escalate their situation so that they don't end up having to be restrained or be sedated, has been really fulfilling. And also, I think that it's really, really important for us to have a really balanced view of an approach to psychedelics and psychedelic education. And there's so much out there right now about the benefits. And I think it's really important for us to, as we talk about the very real potential benefits of psychedelics, to also say, it's really important for us to also understand and navigate and mitigate the risks. And there's risks to all substance use, whether it's a prescribed pharmaceutical or a legal drug like alcohol or tobacco. So all drugs have inherent risk. And the ones with psychedelics are just unique in that it's such a, the experience can be so consciousness opening and perspective altering that it can be very disorienting. And so I think that it's really important for us to understand that, some people, when they take a psychedelic, are just going to need some extra support. I think it's helpful to know what you yourself are getting into and ensure that you're making responsible decisions with your mind and with your body. And so harm reduction, not just peer support, but just like full spectrum harm reduction of not just psychedelics, but all drugs. I really think that approach and that philosophy too of non-stigmatizing approach that's an alternative to that prohibitionist just say no mindset, and that says, look, the reality is that people are choosing to use these substances, so how can we help ensure safety and optimize the likelihood of a beneficial experience and minimize the potential of a negative or dangerous experience for people. I think that that's really important. So I see harm reduction as really like it's a movement. It's a really big movement. And the work that we do at MAPS is just such a small part of that overall movement that's really focused more on psychedelics because we're MAPS. We think it's really important to have harm reduction with all substances, but you can only do so much at once. And so, and then, more specifically too, MAPS has really chosen to focus on the peer support work. Obviously, there's other organizations. I serve on the board of Dance Safe, which is drug education and information organization that does drug testing. And that's like a whole other area of harm reduction. That's also really, important. And so, harm reduction is really, it's a place in my career where I feel like I've had the opportunity to get very creative and experiment and that in some ways that are not, like you were speaking to in the beginning, are not necessarily like possible or in that more clinical setting. Because with peer support, we're not really doing therapy. And, to your viewers, especially because so many people, this is a lot of nurses. And I think that one of the benefits of peer support is it's such a holistic model that so many people from so many different backgrounds can come in and get engaged in providing peer support, right? And don't have to be therapists because of that peer support model. And I'll say one last thing about peer support.
Continue.
I just think that like where we're at with the mental health system, like I think that we need as a society, and this is kind of going a little bit beyond just psychedelic peer support or harm reduction, but I think as a society, we really need more peer support models that can address this huge gap in our mental health system. Like there's a lot of people who need support. Accessibility is a huge issue. And there's also different spectrums of support, I think. And for people who are really struggling with mental health, obviously seeing a professional psychologist, psychiatrist, or therapist is key, is important. And for people who, we're all struggling in some way. We're all, especially this, this past year for everyone. And so we all need support. And so I think that the peer support model really does serve in society to fill a gap where laypersons, people with some more basic attendance and training in basic emotional and psychological support really have a place in the emerging, hopefully evolving mental health system.
Yeah, beautiful. So many important things in that. The first thing I'd like to do is actually take a moment to recognize the work that you've done and your dedication. And when you mentioned the 6,000 people just that have come through the Zendo, well, not only have you helped to touch all of their lives, it's been one of the most meaningful experiences in my life. And I know many of the volunteers that have come through express the same thing, all the feedback I've always gotten. So learning how to provide peer support has this just amazing inherent value that it's really immeasurable, and it's just, rippling through the universe. And so thank you for that work. And just a plug for nurses or students who want to learn some peer support skills, you can volunteer for Zendo, our organizations like Whitebird, Dance Safe, but there's also Fireside Project where you can practice some of this harm reduction and peer support in a new 24/7 peer support line. So just wanted to mention that too. All right, let's move on to some more questions, Sara. Tell me how you take care of yourself. What type of self-care practices do you incorporate in both your personal life and professionally?
Yeah, great. So this is also, I think, related a bit to, the first question around my story. So I think that, I don't know if it was Fritz Perls or I forget what therapist it was that said, don't ever trust a therapist who said that they got into the business to help other people. Which I think is kind of, it's a little harsh, but I think there's a lot of truth there that, when people are struggling and suffering, they want to learn about what's going on with them, or if they see that in their family or they see that in their surrounding environment. So I think for me, the other piece to becoming a therapist that I didn't name in the first question was my own healing process. And I grew up in a family that both of my parents struggled with addiction and like a history of some transgenerational, intergenerational trauma. And so, we all have our childhood experiences, and those for me it really informed I think my curiosity of how to support the relieving of suffering. I struggled with my own depression when I was younger, when I was a teenager. And so I think that was always an undercurrent. And how that's related to this question, I think, is that for me, self-care is like it's a bottom up approach, meaning that like tending to my own personal healing and wellness on a regular basis. I go to my own therapy. I do my own somatic work. I get support myself, right? So I think that self-care, if we're not tending to our self-growth, our personal growth, our personal healing, and getting the necessary support that we need for that, whether that's our community, our friends, or other professionals, I think that continuing to tend to the journey of healing, because it's a lifelong journey, is, I think, the biggest self-help or self-care that I do. I think that, with self-care, there's a lot of things that we can do that if we're not also doing that work are just kind of band-aids, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of things that are really important for, learning how to resource ourselves, and especially things like spending time in nature and exercise and all of those things. And so I do all of those things as well, making sure to move my body, making sure to spend time in nature. But I think that it starts with ensuring that I'm consistently working with healing my own traumas. And I think that that's really at the core of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming that and sharing that.
Yeah, and I would say that's somebody for the listeners, who is one of my kind of mentors in that, like somebody who I see as really discussing like the personal journey of healing one's own personal trauma and how that extends into helping other people, is Gabor Mate. And so I think his work and reading his books have been really helpful for me around that.
Great. All right. Can you take a moment to describe how others view you or react to you when they learn that you are a therapist working with and contributing to and shaping the field? What are some of the reactions you get?
Overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, I think that it's been really amazing to see, like, even my family, and like my grandfather was a Vietnam vet, and when I told him what I was doing with MDMA, I think this story touches my heart, so I share it. It's just like, he didn't know what MDMA really was. I explained to him, this is this substance, this chemical, and it has this effect and it has this impact, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm working with people, and he struggles with PTSD to this day, and haven't been able to get him treatment, and but it's something that he's so, like, he just wants to talk about all the time. He's like, oh, my granddaughter works with veterans, and obviously I don't work with just veterans, I work with other, but for him as a veteran, that's so big for him. So I'll just speak about my grandfather first, because I think that how our families respond is actually really, I think that it's significant. And I really I'm very grateful that my family has been very supportive of the work that I do. And they've been very supportive. And I think that not everybody has that, and some families, are really disapproving and really, or just completely not interested. So yeah, I think for me, it's like starts with how my family has responded. And then, I just think there's been so much, as the research and as the results come out, and as things get more and more known about the potential benefits, I think that there's definitely so much more openness to it now than, people who are elders in this work who were trying to do this. I mean, Rick, who started MAPS in 1986 and has been at this for 35 years, I think that the stigma and the obstacles that someone who's an elder in this space have had to navigate are different than what's what I've had to navigate and what others have had to navigate in the past decade. So yeah, it's been just really positive. Yeah. I had an interesting, when I first started doing this work, I was trying to choose between two career paths, and one was with MAPS and one was with another therapy program. And I told them and was very open about like the other job that I was looking at, and told them about the MDMA work. And I'm pretty sure that's why I didn't get that job.
I'm so glad you did not get offered that job.
Me too.
All right. Well, I know we're getting pretty far into our time together, and I want to save time for the audience questions. So be sure you're putting those into the chat soon. I'd like to ask you a few more here. And of course, if there's anything you want to share, Sara, please feel free to at any time. And I want to know how you envision the future of psychedelic therapy and research. And if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to how you see nurses and their perspective or their skill set being able to contribute to this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that, obviously there's clinics, right? Like clinics are the thing that is really, a lot of people right now are developing clinics and different clinical models and different ways of working. And there's so many different models, and it's really a fun, just like such an interesting time to be in this work, to see all these different models that are emerging, and all of these more holistically, more integratively focused clinics that are incorporating or planning and preparing to incorporate psychedelics into their work. And so I think that, but in terms of like the bigger picture of like the future of psychedelic research and therapy, I think that ultimately it's the potential to completely transform the mental health system. And our mental health system is just, it's a really unwell system right now. It really, and I think during COVID, we're seeing a lot of these institutions and a lot of these systems that we have, including the medical system and mental health care system. And we're kind of seeing these old models or these old paradigms of doing things falling apart at the seams. And I think that's, it's really hard to see that, but I think it's also a good thing, because there has been a lot of, it's just, there's old paradigms that are no longer serving, no longer working. They're not inclusive. They're not addressing root causes. They're focused on symptom suppression. They're focused on money and generating money. And, I think that, the commercialization of that system and all of that. So I think that ultimately psychedelics have the ability to transform that, both because they address mental health issues they can address mental health issues at the root cause, rather than just being something that deals with just symptom suppression. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely places and times for symptom suppression, and thank goodness for, for medication. There's many, many people who wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the support of that. But I think it's in our mental health system, we need to focus on root causes, and we need to start focusing on not just root causes within the individual, but the systemic issues that are happening in our society. And I think that psychedelics can help us, don't always, but they can help people open up to those bigger systemic issues and start to see beyond their own ego sense self of need to just protect and, care for self and family, and start to have a more broader view of their interconnection to all beings and the suffering of other beings in the planet. And I think that it can help people develop compassion for others, and start to recognize that, we're really all in this together. And I think that that's the oneness experience that can be part of, people's psychedelic experience, not always. So I think that, just probably nothing short of, completely revolutionizing the mental health field. And in terms of nurses, I've just had such the benefit of working alongside, you and so many nurses in the Zendo Project, as well as in the research. I work with a co-therapist who is his background and his training is as a nurse. And I think that's some of the things that I've noticed. And this is not my profession, so I'm just going to probably scratch the surface here. But just a couple of things that I've noticed is there can be, with nurses, I think a little bit more of an awareness of that systemic sort of social systemic issue and how people are part of that and how what people are dealing with is part of like a bigger, more social, like public health issue, right? I think that there's some similarities there also with social workers that I don't think is always there. It can be, but in terms of the training, at least for therapists and psychiatrists. So I think that there can be, what I've seen in some of the nurses that I've worked alongside is just an awareness of an individual's place within a larger system and how that system impacts individuals, as well as how that system perpetuates and impacts societies and culture. I think another thing that I've seen, especially for emergency, ER nurses and psychiatric nurses, is the ability, especially when it comes to things like peer support, to be with the immediacy of crisis. And that also comes up in therapy, right? So people in therapy on a psychedelic, the way that process looks can sometimes look like more of a crisis, meaning that it can look bigger than in normal therapy, right? It's a psychedelics, like we see in the Zendo Project and what we see in the research is that the experiences can be so big for people that they really need people who are trained to work with like more extreme state experiences, including crisis. And Liz, that's just one thing that I've seen you so skilled at, being able to triage, to be able to be working with multiple different departments, because as you know, the Zendo Project works alongside medical, works alongside law enforcement, security, all of these other departments. And so, but I think that also transfers over to a more clinical setting, because the things that come up for people can look really big. And I think sometimes, like psychiatric nurses and ER nurses have experience with those really intense crisis situations. So I think that those are a couple things. And then the last thing is just, I spoke to this a little bit, but just like more of an ability to triage with multiple departments, and specifically, the medical piece is really important. Having that medical knowledge, having the knowledge of different substances and the pharmacology and all of that as well. So those are just a few things, but you can think of others.
I appreciate that. Yeah. The multitasking, the medical training and background safety, keeping people safe, and the ability to communicate, give report, receive report, and to hold space for many people at once in multiple layers of being: crisis, their friends, their family. Yeah. So, I agree. Nurses have a lot to give. And conversely, we do have a lot to learn from therapists. So just want to express that as well. Mm-hmm. All right. What advocacy role do you see nurses and therapists taking in terms of changing laws, policies, harm reduction, or education? Or any other topics that are important to you in this emerging field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first doing the work, getting involved in doing the work. And a lot of the work really speaks for itself, right? So for those of you who are stepping in and wanting to get involved in clinical work and research, or I know a lot of nurses who are getting more involved in ketamine therapy and ketamine treatment, because that is a place where there's often a little bit more space and actually need for that medical oversight as well. So doing the work, and the results really will speak for themselves. And so doing the actual work is advocacy work, because it will create change, and it's supporting individuals in their own healing, and that in and of itself. And then I think just lending our voices and our names to the movement, whether that's through policy and advocacy and things like that, change that's happening on a more federal and state level regarding things like decriminalization and legalization, and writing. And I think OPENurses has done a really good job of this, of like really lending your voice, getting involved, like standing up for the issues around psychedelics, accessibility, and research and peer support. Research, peer support, and harm reduction. I think just speaking up. And I think that that's it's something that we're able to do that people were not able to do. Even a decade ago, to put your credentials and your name next to psychedelics was really risky. And I think that luckily that's starting to change, as we shared. So I think that just continuing to lend your voice in the ways that you feel like your unique gifts and your unique skill set and genius, like the things that really light you up. I think that there's so much room in this field for so many different types of, so many different gifts and so many different knowledge sets. And I think that one thing that I saw early on in this work was, because it seemed like the only place to work was psychedelic therapy, I think that there was a shift where like a lot of people wanted, okay, that's the path I'm going to take. I'm going to learn to become a psychedelic therapist. But I think there's so many ways now that people can get involved in this work. And, for right now, I'll keep it to the mental health and medical healing professions. Obviously, there's many, many other ways that people can get involved in the psychedelic movement. But in terms of our professions, I think that really tapping into what are your own unique gifts, and honing those gifts, and following where your heart takes you, rather than trying to fit yourself into something that you think is going to be how it is. Because I think that the way that the psychedelic movement and therapy and harm reduction is going to look a decade from now, or even 5 years from now, is going to be so different. And there really is room for everybody's talent and skill set and voice. So, if you're like, I don't know if I want to be a therapist, like, I don't know if that's my thing, then just, following your heart. And if you do want to be a therapist, obviously, exploring that.
Wow, thanks for the invitation to follow our heart. And that's great. Well, if there are any questions from the audience, I'd like to invite those in. Oh, and here we have our first one. Do you hear from many people experiencing debilitating flashbacks, Sara? Either in your sessions or maybe at an event when things come up?
So flashbacks, in the sense of like actually reliving an experience or reliving a psychedelic journey, are that has come up pretty infrequently in my work, honestly. I think that more so it's been people who are, I want to clarify with this question, if this is debilitating flashbacks related to trauma or debilitating flashbacks related to psychedelics. So maybe if that person can put that, because sometimes people talk about both. So if it's debilitating flashbacks related to trauma, lots and lots of that. So I just wanted to, if we can just clarify, maybe. Like trauma flashbacks or psychedelic flashbacks. If it's psychedelic flashbacks, not so much. I don't. And debilitating flashbacks, if it's trauma, then yes. And I can say that in the MDMA work, that can come in a variety of ways. It can, flashbacks don't have to just be visual. When we think about a flashback, we think about actually going back and seeing that memory in our mind. And what I've seen with trauma work is that memories can come through multiple channels. They can come through our mind as visuals. They can come as an emotion, as a sensation, as an overwhelming feeling, or they can come through somatically. And if it's a flashback related to trauma that existed precognition trauma, typically there are no words or images. There's more of physical experience. So I hope that answered that question.
Thank you. And do you utilize technologies such as audiovisual entertainment or neural feedback alongside psychedelics in your practice?
Oh, audiovisual entrainment. I was like,
entertainment. I did not read that correctly. Thanks for catching that, Sarah. Yeah.
I don't personally. I know that there are people who are exploring that. I don't use neurofeedback or audiovisual in my work. No, we use music in the MDMA sessions, and definitely that's a big focus is selecting the right music for those sessions. But yeah, that's not part of my practice. But I think it's fascinating. I do. I think that there's a lot of possibility there for all kinds of things, whether it's, I know that there's a few companies who are working with VR specifically and who are wanting to, who are starting to actively use VR in conjunction with certain substances, specifically ketamine.
Great. And if there are no other questions, I think we have time maybe for one more of ours. And wondering, here we go. What is your opinion about psychedelic therapists needing to experience psychedelics themselves?
Yeah, this is one of those questions. That's, I think that it's such a tricky one, and it's just really like this question always just it's a wonderful question, and it always brings up so much frustration, not towards the person who asks it, frustration towards the system that we're in, right? That these substances are not in a lot of places not able for people to legally access. And so it makes the conversation obviously a little challenging. I think that, and there's a lot of places where people can legally access psychedelics, and whether it is, an ayahuasca ceremony or, ketamine therapy that's available. And, so I think that obviously it's tricky because we don't condone or condemn illegal substance use. And at the same time, this is a good question. I think that in the MDMA work that we are doing, we are very lucky to be able to give the therapists MDMA as part of their training. And I think that it's huge in that work. It's so for the therapist to have that experience and then to sit and do therapy, it just creates a level of understanding that, is just really different. I've had not all, but most of my participants in the MDMA research ask me, not really ask, but just look at me and go, oh, wow, you've done this. Like, you've been through this experience, right? And I thank my lucky stars that it was part of this clinical trial where I was allowed to go through my own legal experience of MDMA, because I can go, yes, and that can be okay, So I think that, it's just, I also think it's important, cognitive liberty includes cognitive liberty, as it's talked about often in harm reduction, is, the liberty and the freedom to alter our consciousness however we choose. And cognitive freedom also includes not altering consciousness. There's many people who choose to be sober for a variety of different reasons. Many people who choose not to explore with psychedelics. And I think it's really important for those people to also feel like there is room for them. There's many different ways of exploring altered states that are not just psychedelics. There's holotropic breath work, there's yoga, there's fasting, there's vision quests. There's so many different ways that people can explore those altered states. So I think that can it be helpful for and supportive for the sitter or the therapist to have had those experiences? Absolutely. And do I think it's absolutely necessary? No.
Excellent. As a newcomer to the field, is it taboo or bad practice to ask therapists and researchers about their own psychedelic use, given the legal burdens on license holders?
I think that it just depends on, what setting you're in. And I think just respecting that everyone has a different comfort level around sharing their experiences. And so I so look forward to the day where people can just openly talk about it. And, there's a lot of people in the field who choose that and who choose to openly speak about their experiences. And then there's many who don't, for understandably, right? Because there are potential repercussions to that. And so, I wouldn't necessarily say it's taboo or bad practice in general, especially if you're just having a conversation with a therapist. But I also think just recognizing and respecting that people are going to have different comfort levels depending on, their professional identity, where they work, who they work with. A lot of people are coming from much more of a clinical or institutional model. Some people not so much. So yeah, it's just really from person to person. It's a great question.
And what do you think about the emerging decriminalization movement?
So I actually here in Colorado, in Denver, we passed Ordinance 301, which is decriminalization of mushrooms, and we were actually the first state to pass that, and that was really exciting. That was back in 2019, and part of that ordinance and that initiative was to develop a panel, and it's sort of a policy. It's called it's a very long term, the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel. And so it's actually the first panel of its kind actually in the world, not just in the United States, because there's other places, such as Portugal, obviously, where psychedelics and other drugs are decriminalized. But it's a panel that was put together as part of the initiative, and it reports to, we're a city panel, reports to the mayor. And shortly after that panel was created, I was appointed as a harm reduction representative to that panel. And what we ended up doing was forming a working group on the panel with a few of us. And the working group was focused on bringing harm reduction training specifically to co-responders in Denver. So I think your audience will probably think this is really awesome because so many nurses and people in the medical profession. So we're working with different departments here in Denver. We're working on the panel partnered with MAPS to develop the training. So we're in the process of developing the training, and it is for first responders. So it's for paramedics, the paramedics division, law enforcement, the sheriff's department. And then in Denver, we're really, we have a great co-responder unit. So mental health co-response unit, and one that goes out to behavioral health calls with paramedics, and then another that goes out and actually goes on behavioral health related calls that that go to the police. So they will be with the officers and they'll arrive on scene with the officers. So we're also working to help develop the training for those mental health professionals as well. So the idea here in Denver is that, we working to train all of those departments, fire and dispatch are the other two departments, and that will serve as a model that we can then take to other cities. And we would not have been able to do that without decriminalization. We would not have been able to go to the city and say, hey, we would like to propose and initiate a training that's going to go across all of these different departments and integrate it into the trainings of these first responders had it not been for decriminalization. They would have just been, what? Not because people don't understand the importance of it, but because just like with harm reduction at festivals, it took us many, many years, right? Because because of the stigma and the laws and the legality, it's like, well, how are we going to how are we going to train an entire city of first responders if something is still completely illegal and criminalized? And so decrim really opened the door for that. And I think that decrim is it's looking different in every city and every state. And I think it's opening a lot of doors for things to ways of approaching and working with psychedelics that would not have been possible without decrim. I'm a proponent of full legalization with regulation of all substances, not just psychedelics. I believe that legalization and regulation is really the only way that's going to keep us ultimately safe, because there's so many psychedelics right now on the black market that are adulterated. Fentanyl, as people have been hearing, is a huge issue, but adulterated substances. And even if you decriminalize, you still don't fix the black market issue. And so I think from as a harm reductionist, I am let's legalize these. And I also recognize that decriminalization is a huge step, a really big step, and in a really good direction. And I think that, I think it's going to be really important for the different initiatives to communicate and learn from one another so that we can look at best practices and what works in some places may not work in other places. But I think that the deprioritization of these substances in terms of law enforcement is huge and is really important.
Yeah, thank you for really illustrating a bird's view of what's happening on all these greater levels. And I wish you the best with this exemplary model for helping train responders and keeping the community safe. Yeah. All right. It looks like we're a little bit past 3 o'clock. And if we have time for further audience questions, let's do it if you're interested. And if we don't, we could certainly take any other questions and, with your permission, Sarah, answer them in another modality, perhaps post the answers in our private Facebook page, if that would be okay with you, or email directly to people, whatever we can come up with a good plan for. Yeah. And I'd also like to, great, I thank you. Just take a moment to remind everybody about our group and that we'd love for you to be a part of OPENurses and help us design the future of nursing and psychedelics. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. And let your friends know that they can view this again. We have one more question. Sarah, where can we find out more about the training program in Denver?
Yeah, so right now we don't have a lot of written information out there. We do plan on getting more of that out there soon. And we also, I'll just, little shameless plug that's related to this. So if people want to learn more about Zendo Project, they can go to zendoproject.org. And if you sign up for the newsletter, we will be giving updates on that. We do have a bulletin coming out at MAPS. Our MAPS bulletins come out every, 3 months. And so we do have a bulletin that's going to be coming out, and that we do have an article that I wrote with a colleague of mine who's working with me on the project, and that will be in that article. And so yeah, if you sign up for the newsletter, which you can do that on the website, then you'll learn about that, as well as other trainings too. So a lot of people have been asking us about our trainings, because before COVID, we were doing a lot of in-person public trainings. We were going to a lot of major cities and doing those, and we stopped, obviously. So if people are interested in receiving training, we will be continuing and launching more trainings this summer and picking that up again. So if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll know about that. You could also follow us on social media. Those are a couple ways, but yeah. And there'll be more to share. Right now, we're in the development and piloting phase here in Denver. And so once we get through the piloting phase, we'll have a lot more to share about how that's going here.
Yeah, and you'll be able to share it at the next MAPS conference, which I'm happy to hear is going to be there too. So you'll get the city ready for when we swarm them.
Yeah, Psychedelic Science 2013. We'll see you all there. Able to see your faces Definitely. And not just your little words.
Yeah, and it will be a pleasure to see you present your research and all the work that you've done. Well, with that, I just want to once again thank you for being here, Sara. And you're a transformational leader in the field, and I have the deepest gratitude and respect for you.
And thank you, Liz. You as well.
Thank you. Viewers, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to having more of these conversations in the future with each and every one of you. Any other questions? No? Okay.